So just to say a little bit more about Baudrillard, because as well as mapping the sign and the changes of use of the sign, you've also got him talking about different ideas, different historical ideas of society. So the way in which different societies used and structured themselves around symbolic exchange, around notions of production. And for us, you may want to kind of go back to ideas of modernity and the way in which he talks about kind of production and technologies, but I think the postmodern society and the way in which that is structured around simulation is very useful, is very interesting. So we had that idea of the reality TV. Kim Kardashian is a fabulous kind of example of celebrity and the use of her icon, her image, her body shape, the way in which she has become a sign herself. There is no real, if you like, there at all. So you could explore some of those ideas around technology, and in particular, I suppose, digital technology as well, which is kind of much more recent, but a way in which that gets us to think about people, signs, and reproduction. So thinking about this kind of fourth stage, both of the sign and in terms of society, these signs no longer represent the real. They no longer represent the person. It's just playing out a series of signs and symbols. If you look, I've put quite an amusing link to the idea of the hipster. So think about how we can read the hipster as a sign, what the tattoos refer to, what the beard refers to, and all the rest of it. So rather than representation for Baudrillard, he talks about this idea of simulation. There's no origin, there's no way to get back to the real. And what he terms then is our existence then becomes about the hyper real, so exaggeratedness. Um, Jameson, our third critic, we talked a little bit about in the way in which we could think about genre, the way in which he talks about postmodernity and postmodernism as splicing, as breaking down high and low cultures. We talked about that idea of the use of the past and the commodification then of the past as well. So have a look in your readers, have a look at French Lieutenant's Woman, which was something we kind of referred to. That would be something you might want to kind of think about as well. So I've used the symbol of recycling. I think that's a nice kind of way of thinking about it. And he talks then about the effect of literature, the effect of art, the effect of culture, as being offering a new depthlessness that we reproduce rather than create originality or original works that really affect us. So he talks about this kind of waning of effect, and I think that there are a number of kind of postmodern works actually that challenge that challenge our ideas of effect. So something like Harvey's portrait of Myra Hindley, which you might want to look at. The Jenks book on transgression uses that as an example. You might think about sensations, actually, that was as part of that art installation. So that might be a way of kind of thinking back and returning to Jameson. So for Jameson, he talks about these four areas really that altogether the package of all of this repackaging, if you like, of the past, the end of these various kind of crises that we've seen previously, this new notion of depthlessness and waning of effect. Altogether, it's what he typifies as being known as postmodernism. So we looked at Andy Warhol. I think we talked about the reproduction of the soup, of the Campbell soup tins, and how that played with ideas of high and low culture, that you had a soup tin that anyone would have in their pantry that was being elevated through a screen print and hung on the walls of art galleries. So how as well, how would that refer to the human figure? So Warhol's human subjects, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, himself to a certain extent as well, how he reproduced them, demonstrated them over and over again. So how does their effect change? How does that impact? And for Jameson, you get this idea then of kind of the fragmentation of the subject. But I like that idea. I like that idea of endless kind of reproductions. So look at Warhol, look at his use of art. I think the visual is a really lovely way in of thinking both about modernism and also postmodernism as well. You might want to compare some of those works of art, what is being done differently. We looked at Richard Hamilton as well, and the use of collage. Well, that's a really interesting idea. To what extent are some of the postmodern writers that we're featuring, we're coming across, almost taking ideas a little bit like kind of a plagiarist, and taking those ideas and cutting them up and reframing them to make something new. Well, if you do that, if you cut up the Mona Lisa and put it together with another number of other paintings, what does that look like? You can still demonstrate the origins of some of those works of art, but it wouldn't necessarily strike us as being something that's particularly new. So that's kind of Jameson's point, really, about that waning of effect by doing that, by splicing together those different ideas. And we see that in literature through the genres and the clash of genres as well. So just a little bit of a recap then about ideas of postmodernity, postmodern condition. We can think about postmodernity as being historical, an economic period, a period which is typified by what we call the cultural logic of late capitalism, and you'll see that time and time again in Lyotard's work. It's typified by an incredulity towards master narratives, grand narratives, meta-narratives. Take a moment now, go back over your notes, see what we termed as being those master narratives. You get a representation of realities rather than reality, ideas of perhaps the hyper-real that you can never get back to real. We all are about this kind of idea of simulation, and even representation itself is undermined. We experience collectively doubt, that we have no longer mechanisms for truth, that truth becomes something that's very localized, interpretation becomes more important. Our experience of culture and literature is that of is heterogeneous rather than homogeneous. So we've got ideas of multiplicity and plurality as well. Postmodernity, if you look at ideas from Foucault, if you look at this idea of historiography and how that's represented in postmodern work, you get a questioning of power and a reassessment of power. And it depends whether you feel positive about that there's something about postmodern condition which ultimately will result in change. But for a lot of people, ideas of postmodernism is almost kind of swimming in the now, that we're not able to kind of exit those ideas, that ultimately power will out, or that power has become so displaced that that again we're unable to kind of challenge it. So some of those ideas for you to think about, that you might want to nuance further in relation to the postmodern condition, which are equally relevant in relation to postmodernism. You know, is this an opportunity? Is that kind of idea of cutting up, splicing, you know, do you see something new there? Or is it ultimately anterior, that you're always getting elements of what's gone before, this sense of recycling? Is there an opportunity for, when we decenter the voices of these patriarchal, very often empowered narratives, that we allow marginal voices to be heard, that we start to think about post-colonial ideas, which we will do with Anna Maria, talking about white teeth, that we start to think about female narratives or lesbian or gay narratives in a particular way? Does it allow for these marginal voices to be heard? So is there an opportunity through postmodernity and postmodernism? And furthermore, if these grand narratives, these meta-narratives of Lyotard's have been dismantled, what then for narrative? McHale kind of talks about this anxiety regarding narration and regarding story. And for Eagleton, if you displace this idea of the grand narrative, what can we fight against? If there's no framework, no totality to the social life, then there's no opportunity for change, there's no opportunity for revolution, if you like, and kind of renewal. So once you kind of rethought over ideas of postmodernity and postmodernism, come back to these ideas, compare them to what we'd said about modernity and modernism, because to a certain extent it's a continuation of a very similar debate. So go back to some of those notes you made in relation to the manifesto in particular, and see now from the reflection, from the viewpoint of postmodernism, what you feel in relation to those aspects. So some of the examples that we've talked about, some of the features of kind of the postmodern are here represented again. The notion of new depthlessness, a prioritisation sometimes of style over substance, so very tricksy narratives, sometimes very elaborate narratives, sometimes very experimental narratives as well, in this kind of new way, if you like, of writing. But I won't say any more about that. It is a difficult area, postmodernism and postmodernity. I hope that these e-lectures will in some way help you reflect on some of the thinking you're already doing. They're not intended as an end in themselves, so please do continue with your reading, and I look forward to discussing these things with you both before Easter and after Easter, in the lead up to the exam, where we can talk more about these ideas and some of the problems. This is not this is a knotty problem. This is not something that we can unravel terribly quickly. So I hope that's helped. Any questions, please do get in touch, and I look forward to talking to you about it further.